Hi, everyone. Wanted to first apologize for the slight delay. We had some Zoom issues, which I'm sure you can all understand. Welcome. My name is Madhav Rajan. I'm the Dean and the George Schultz Professor of Accounting at Chicago Booth. Many of you looking at my background will know that I'm at our lovely Gleacher Center. So this is a live background. It's not virtual. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. I'm thrilled that you're all here to welcome Booth alum Russ Hutchinson of Goldman Sachs to our Distinguished Speaker Series. This is, of course, a long-standing Booth tradition. The DSS brings in high-profile leaders from the government, from business, from the community, to the school to share their insights and experience. We switched last year when the pandemic hit to a virtual Distinguished Speaker Series, and we had a series of events asking our alums about how they were dealing with COVID. So we had Kurt Delbene from Microsoft, Tom Ricketts from the Cubs, Jenny Scandon of UL, and many others. And the series was very successful. So we continued sort of through the fall. We had Anne Mukherjee, chairman of Pernod Ricard, Dave McLennan of Cargill, and many others. And just last week, we kicked off our series for this year with Eric Gleacher himself. With that, let me introduce today's speaker. Russ Hutchinson is the Chief Strategy Officer at Goldman Sachs. He's an ex officio member of the Management Committee, and he's also on the firm's Asset Liability Committee. So Russ helps drive Goldman Sachs' strategy, M&A, strategic investing, and partnership efforts. And he also plays a key role in the firm's focus on innovation through GS Accelerate, which is the firm's internal innovation engine. Russ became the Chief Strategy Officer in January of this year. So prior to that, Russ was head of financial institutions M&A in the Americas and a senior coverage officer focused on companies in specialty finance. So Russ joined Goldman Sachs in 2001 as an associate, became managing director in 2008, and partner in 2016. He began his career at BCG in Toronto. In addition to his MBA from Booth, Russ has a BSc in engineering physics from Queen's University. Thank you very much, Russ, for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let me just start with asking you about your career at Goldman Sachs. What has sort of your career path been like, and why have you stayed at the firm for so long?
Great. Look, I think there are a lot of different paths at Goldman Sachs. A lot of people have different approaches. Some people have many different jobs throughout a long career at Goldman Sachs. Some people like me spend a lot of time in one place. I did my summer while I was at Booth in our financial institutions group and investment banking back in the year 2000. I came back as a full-time associate in 2001, and I proceeded to then spend 2 decades in our financial institutions group. So advising banks, insurance companies, broker dealers, asset managers on a wide range of things, mergers and acquisitions, raising capital, capital structure, really across the gamut of the most important decisions faced by C-suite executives. And I did that for 2 decades. And then last year, actually about this time, David Solomon, our CEO, called me up and said, I want you to be our Chief Strategy Officer. So I officially started on Jan 1 of 2021. So I guess I'm 10 months into it. And we've already announced two pretty significant acquisitions. So it's been a hell of a ride so far.
So how has your day-to-day work changed since taking on this role, Russ? What does the new role entail, and sort of what are you most focused on as part of it?
Yeah, my remit is very broad. And so I work with our executive office, so with David Solomon and John Waldron, in terms of helping them think through our strategy and execute upon it. I also work with all of our senior business leaders across our divisions. So a lot of time with our division heads, as well as our treasurer, our CFO, really helping execute on our strategy. And it's an interesting time to be in this role at Goldman Sachs. We did our first ever investor day in January of 2020. Actually, just before the pandemic hit, and for the first time ever in our history, we announced a very ambitious plan and a strategy around what we were going to do. And it revolved really around three pillars: growing and strengthening our existing businesses, adding new products and services to diversify our business mix, and operating more efficiently across just how we operate in terms of expenses and cost, as well as capital and funding. And with that, we announced a number of targets that at the time felt pretty ambitious, KPIs across all of our divisions. And so I spend a lot of my time just focused on executing on that, executing on all of the different initiatives that we announced to basically to grow and strengthen our businesses, to add new products and services, and to operate more efficiently. And we execute on that with a number of tools in our book. Number one, we have just straight strategy. So actually just kind of going into our divisions and trying to solve problems for them through organic methods. And sometimes that includes starting up new businesses and new products within Goldman Sachs. We'll often use our Accelerate incubator in order to do that. We also do M&A. So we identify, we evaluate, we execute, and we integrate acquisitions. We also do a lot of strategic investing. So it's late stage growth equity investing in consortiums or in platforms that are important to us, where we want to seat at the table and we want to make sure these things are successful, and where we think we can really add value both as an investor and a partner. And then we have this Office of Integration, which really is in charge of helping us successfully integrate and achieve commercial outcomes through the acquisitions that we've made. So it's really a broad remit, and I'd say I spend my day, basically kind of dancing around, all four of those things: strategy, M&A, strategic investing, and integration.
So given just how broad this is, Russ, as you mentioned, I mean, is there something in your career, in your background that you think helped prepare you for this role?
Yeah, look, I think, my early days in consulting, the 2 decades I spent as an investment banker, my time at University of Chicago, my time, quite frankly, as a budding engineer and physicist, it's all kind of revolves around being very analytical, very fact-oriented, very focused on data and kind of using data and facts and analytics to drive decision-making. I think all of those things are super important. And then the skills that I developed advising clients is incredibly helpful. And it just helps me in terms of being able to work with different business leaders in different parts of Goldman Sachs, to help them really take ownership of a lot of our initiatives and strategies and drive things forward.
So you had mentioned GS Accelerate. Could you just maybe say a little bit about just broadly, how does Goldman view innovation, and how does GS Accelerate facilitate change within the firm?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I'd say innovation and entrepreneurship are absolutely key to our strategy. And you can see that, quite frankly, broadly across some of the businesses we're trying to grow within Goldman Sachs. So if you look, for example, at Marcus, our consumer banking business, if you look at transaction banking on the commercial side, those are new businesses for us. We started them from scratch and we're growing them. In the case of Marcus, we started from scratch in 2016. It's been 5 years. We're up to $100 billion of deposits. It's a serious business. And I'd say those are examples at the very macro level where we've gone big in terms of growing businesses. Accelerate, operates at another level. We're going into, very specific business lines and looking for new ideas and opportunities. And we're leveraging the ideas of Goldman Sachs people across the board. We get ideas from our engineers, from our investment bankers, from our asset managers, our traders. We get ideas across the board from analysts up to managing directors. And for the most part, they're all focused on basically growing and strengthening our existing businesses, attracting durable fee-based revenues, and really leveraging assets within Goldman Sachs, but in a way that's outside of any business's current roadmap or business plan. So it's generally newer, it's innovative. A great example of it, quite frankly, is our directed share program. It was one of our first Accelerate businesses back in 2018. And the idea is basically, as entrepreneurs are going out and doing IPOs, they often want to allocate a portion of the IPO to friends and family. And so this platform allowed us to do that in a digital and electronic way, where we could basically onboard a number of what would be kind of personal wealth management clients, and then allow them to participate in IPOs. And it's a cross-divisional effort. It's important to our wealth management side of the house that's serving wealthy individuals, and it's important to our investment banking franchise that's serving excellent companies looking to grow and to go public.
So maybe just if you could say a little bit about your philosophy of like leadership, and how has that been affected by the events of the last 18 months?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I not necessarily on purpose or deliberately, but I tend to lead from the front. That is, I like to be with my team, working through the analytics, basically, on the front line. And that's my style, quite frankly. And as you can imagine, that's harder in a pandemic when everyone's working remotely, and where it's just harder to have that kind of up close, kind of impersonal interaction with folks. And I would also say, I took over my new job, I guess it was in January of 2021. I started to transition in November, December of 20. It was in the pandemic. I actually didn't meet most of my team in person until probably like late June. And then even then I was kind of meeting people as they were kind of re-emerging. Fortunately, Goldman Sachs has been very forward in terms of basically asking people to come back to work. And actually that's been a blessing for me personally, because it's allowed me to actually get to know my team, interact with them in person. And it's been, it's actually been really great to get people back in the office. And I'd say, I know a lot of my team members were reluctant at first. They'd gotten used to working from home in their pajamas. But I'd say as people return to the office, they really just appreciate the human interaction. It's energizing, it's exciting. And, quite frankly, for me, it's just amazing because there's so many people I hadn't met in person, people I'd only known on Zoom, who I'd been working with many hours a day. It was just so much better and so much more energizing to actually work together in person. So I'm glad Goldman Sachs did that. And I think most of my team members are pretty happy we did it as well.
So through most people, as they go through in any career, and particularly when you've been at a firm like Goldman for a while, are there people who have been good mentors to you, and sort of what have you learned from that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have very much an apprenticeship culture here. And so, I grew up working for some incredible investment bankers, people who really taught me how to listen, right? And investment banking, like consulting, it's a client-driven business, and your clients come up with all kinds of sometimes amazing and excellent ideas, and sometimes wacky, not so great ideas. And I really learned early on, like, keep an open mind, listen first, ask questions, understand what your client's trying to get to, and work with them. Don't ever put yourself in a position where you're working against your client, no matter how wacky the idea is. Because if you listen, if you ask the right questions, if you figure out what's behind it, what's driving, what are they actually trying to achieve, you can accomplish so much more with them and be just so much more productive than if you fight it or put yourself on the wrong side of the table. And I'd say I've benefited tremendously from my relationships with clients. I had the benefit of a long career in investment banking, covering a lot of, quite frankly, the same clients for a long period of time. And a lot of the CEOs I work with have become important mentors for me. Even in my new role, quite frankly, one of the first things I did is I spent a bunch of time with a lot of my CEO clients, talking to them and talking to their chief strategy officers to understand what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, and just generally soliciting their advice.
Maybe let's go back to your time at Booth. What do you remember about the time? Are there any sort of courses that come to mind, faculty, things that stick out?
Yeah, like I'd say, the faculty is definitely one of the things that drew me to Booth. And I just, I got to tell you, I enjoyed every single course I took. It was just a fantastic experience. But in particular, I would say Professor Thaler's course, Behavioral Economics, which felt kind of new and interesting back in 2001. Now it's like a big deal. It's everywhere. But that was eye-opening. It was fantastic. My accounting course, my first year accounting course, I can't tell you the number of times when I'm starting a new project, looking at a new company, trying to understand something new, and still my first reflex is, let's look at the financials, right? And I grew up as a financial institutions guy. I love a good balance sheet. I like going through the balance sheet, going through the footnotes. It is the best way to really get an understanding of how business works. It's just amazing that within the financial accounts, you've just got such an incredible source of information, much better than kind of reading the flashy ads and the fancy investor presentations with bubbles and arrows and all kinds of misleading stuff. But actually going through, looking at the balance sheet, the income statement, and the footnotes, still, to me, one of the most important sources of information about a company.
And in addition to of course learning the materials, are there any other skills that you would tell our Booth students currently on, things that they should be focusing on or trying to acquire to have a productive career once they leave the school?
Yeah, get to know your classmates. I'm shocked. It's been 20 years and I still find myself interacting over and over again with friends that I made at Booth, whether it's Martin Laguerre or who now works for one of the big Canadian pension funds. Some of the folks at Goldman Sachs that are still here, like Phil Salem, who was in my class and is still here at Goldman Sachs in our financial institutions group running our insurance practice. Hassan Malik, who was a longtime McKinsey partner who works on my team here in strategy, Eyal Nirenberg. I mean, it's just absolutely mind-boggling the number of people who were in Booth around the same time I was, some a year or two earlier or later, but the number of people that I still interact with on a regular basis, and that I'm close to, quite frankly. Some of my closest friends, one of my best men at my wedding was a Chicago Booth grad. So it's just amazing. Just those close relationships and personal friendships have been amazing throughout my whole career.
So we have a bunch of questions that came in ahead of time, and I want to encourage all the audience to send in questions through the Q&A button. So maybe I'll start with some of these, Russ, and then I'll sort of go back and forth. One is, what are the new innovations that it says challenging in your firm? I think maybe they meant what new innovations are you championing in your firm? I mean, what are some of the areas that you're looking to get into?
We spend a lot of time thinking about market structure and distributed ledger technology and digital assets. The distributed ledger technology in particular is pretty profound and has the ability to take a lot of cost and latency out of the movement of payments, the tracking of information across the financial system. It's still very much in its infancy in terms of actual application. But we spend a lot of time just thinking about what the implications of that are across our business. And that naturally just bleeds into considerations around digital assets. Within my remit, I have this growth equity strategic investing book. We've made four relatively small investments in the area over the course of the last 10 months. Including one, I think we announced it last week, One River Digital Asset Management, which is an institutional oriented manager of a variety of digital assets. We made investments in some of the infrastructure companies around blockchain as well. And so that's an area we're tracking closely and just trying to understand what the implications are for our business broadly.
So one of the related questions is, how is Goldman thinking about the future of crypto and sort of digital finance broadly?
Yeah, no, going back to distributed ledger technology, we think that is going to be actually really quite important, across a number of our different businesses and activities. I think the idea of digital currencies, all the major central banks are focused on it, and are looking at ways to think through the implementation of that with their own currencies. And so I think that's going to be super important. And again, it really has the potential to change the way that we move money, quite frankly, and make payments. When you start getting into Bitcoin and stuff like that, I actually think that's the least interesting part of it all. Really, the technology and the application of it much more broadly is interesting. Speculating on Bitcoin is probably, quite frankly, the least interesting part of the discussion.
Good. We have a question in the Q&A. Where do you see the future of financial services groups or firms going with so many innovations going on now?
That's a good question. Pretty broad. Look, it's a very, very broad question. I'm trying to think of how I can kind of cut it up and address it. Look, I think financial services has been, one of the hotbeds of innovation. And if I look at, how things are done in financial services today, take, for example, retail banking, it's completely transformed over the course of the last 20 years. And, I think that continues. We have a view here that, financial services are just going to be more embedded in our everyday lives. We have a saying, we want to bring our products to where the consumer is, where they work, where they play, where they spend their time. We want to embed it in the overall experience, because people don't sit around at home thinking, wow, I really want a loan. I want like the fanciest loan I can get, right? People are like, I want new windows. I want a new car. I want a house. And I think our challenge is to embed the process of financing it, in their overall experience. So they're not thinking about financial services. They're thinking about new windows or a new AC unit or a new house or a new car. And the financial services just are seamlessly embedded in the experience. And I think that's, kind of one of the central tenets to how we think about the evolution on the consumer side.
So we have a follow-on question. I think Scott says, is there a specific fintech threat or opportunity that you see as most sort of salient to Goldman?
I think we have a tremendous amount of opportunity on the fintech side and within payments generally. One of the benefits that we have is we're not an incumbent. We don't have an embedded business. We don't worry about cannibalizing any kind of a legacy business, and we don't have legacy technology. And so for us, it's all opportunity. And we see consumer finance, consumer banking, consumer investing. We see all of those areas, quite frankly, as just open space for us.
So one question we have, discuss the framing for Goldman's entry into the mass affluent / emerging high net worth market. Sort of what is next for Goldman there?
We launched Marcus Invest. I guess it was at the beginning of this year. It's been amazingly successful. And what we found is, I think it's something like 90%, some very high percentage of the customers we're seeing on Marcus Invest are customers we already have through our Marcus savings products. Which is fantastic that we can basically, we can take that customer relationship and extend it across more products. And I'd say, it's through applications like Marcus Invest, investment products that are meant for long-term investors that are delivered, in a simple, easy to understand way, and quite frankly, delivered electronically. That's really kind of how we see mass affluent investing developing over the next several years, and that's where we're planning to continue to invest. We're also coming out with a checking product as well that we can add on. Some people may have noticed we acquired GreenSky. We agreed to acquire GreenSky a few weeks ago. on the home improvement lending side as well. So we're looking at a number of different ways where we can address that kind of mass affluent customer with a suite of products. All digitally focused. So we're not building branches anywhere. We're digital with the mass affluent customer.
So question is how do you build a framework for interacting with the fintech ecosystem? And I think the question essentially is saying, how do you choose who's going to be your partner versus an acquisition versus you put them into the GS Accelerate? So how do you think through that?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. I mean, I think a lot of that develops organically. Certainly for my team and firm-wide strategy, we're very much solutions oriented. So we'll get to know companies. We'll think about the problems that our businesses face, and we go into every situation with an open mind in terms of how it could develop. Number one, we're interested in interesting commercial partnerships and relationships, and we just look for kind of what's the best way to solve a problem for us, and to create value for us and for our partners. And sometimes the best way to do that is a simple commercial partnership or arrangement. Sometimes it requires making an investment and putting one of our people on the board, and having a little bit more of a hands-on approach. And sometimes, quite frankly, it'll make sense to do something more ambitious like an acquisition. But I'd say we kind of go into every situation with an open mind, and we have a vast toolkit that we can apply to each one to solve business problems.
So related to the fintech, but now taking it slightly to a different tack, Russ, it says, what do you think are the biggest innovations or disruptions affecting your old line of work, which is the traditional investment banking sort of advisory?
It's a good question, and it's an interesting time to ask. This has been quite a year for the investment banking world. M&A volumes are phenomenal. The opportunity set that we see in that business is amazing. It's tremendous. And you look across that business, I think we've captured more than our fair share of the market. I think we've had a fantastic time. As I think about the threats, that business is interesting. It is so relationship based, and quite frankly, the stakes are so high for our clients. A lot of that business by its nature has to be, old school. It's got to be personal. It's got to be bespoke. It's got to be relationship driven. It's got to be, kind of highly proprietary knowledge of the market and of people and of the industries you cover. And that creates a natural barrier. Also the ability to bring financing to the table in order to facilitate transactions is important. And so having the regulatory moat of a bank is also helpful to protecting that business. And the check sizes, as you would imagine, are large. And so you really need the wherewithal and strength of a balance sheet. That being said, we're looking for every opportunity we can to automate, to streamline, to make our processes more efficient. Part of that is speed of delivery of service. Part of it, quite frankly, is making life better for our analysts and our associates and our vice presidents, to allow them to get leverage from technology and processes and just quite frankly, make their lives better, and also super productive. So I think that it's not so much disruption, it's more, I'd say, opportunity to basically to improve lives, to streamline processes, and to deliver for our clients.
Yeah, we had another question which said, again, M&A is booming. It might surpass the old peak from 2007. I don't know if that's true or not. Has that happened yet?
I think it may have already passed.
Okay. And the question was just, how has the market changed in the 20 years since you joined Goldman?
I joined during the dark ages. I mean, it's amazing when I look back and I just think of how M&A was done when I joined, and I was there doing it back in those days, and how it's done today, and it's like night and day. I feel like we scribbled M&A on a napkin 20 years ago, and today you look at the level of due diligence that's done and the sophistication of that diligence. It's amazing. When you look at the marketplace of service providers and capital providers around a deal, so nowadays people get rep and warranty insurance, right? That's a market. It's an established market to basically insure the rep and warranty risk around a given acquisition. That's amazing. That didn't exist 20 years ago. But it's just such a much more sophisticated market. And then you look at how M&A is done. Back in the old days, the idea of having an auction was novel, and that's how M&A was done. You'd go out to a broad group of people, a broad group of potential buyers with a given asset, and you'd have everyone compete, and ultimately you pick a winner. And nowadays it's much more bespoke. One of our investment bankers did a study a few years ago where they showed the majority of deals north of, say, about $3 billion were what we call buyer initiated. That is, the deal started because a buyer had proactively courted a target and convinced them to enter into discussions to sell, as opposed to a target deciding they wanted to sell. And many of those transactions evolved into processes where the seller may have reached out to one or two other people. But in a lot of cases, it's like that. It's a bespoke process. You've got a buyer who tells you they want to buy you, and you say, okay, well, let's talk about it. And then you might do a deal with them. You might reach out to one or two people, but you're not necessarily running a big auction anymore. And I'd say there's so much more emphasis around integration and social issues. With a high level of diligence that's conducted, people are also spending time earlier thinking about how an acquisition target is going to fit into their organization, and they're starting to compare the org charts early and figure out, okay, who's going to report to whom, how are we going to make this successful, who's going to be accountable, and they're doing that before they sign on the dotted line, as opposed to doing the acquisition and then figuring it out down the road. So I think M&A has gotten a lot more thoughtful, a lot more sophisticated, and it's just a lot more interesting now than it was back in the Stone Age.
Question: what is your view on corporate social responsibility and basically your view on things like ESG? How does Goldman view it? How do you personally look at it?
I think it's one of the central issues of our time. I think it's an incredibly important area, and I don't think society is ever going to let corporations off the hook. I think it's one of the central issues. We cannot ignore it. We can't sit on the sidelines. We have to take responsibility and own it.
We have a question, I think, going back to your Canadian background. Is there an opportunity in the US to replicate the investment success of the large Canadian pension funds?
That's interesting. I mean, there's an implication in that question that there are not equally successful large US investors. I would argue there are a number of large institutional investors in the US who are incredibly successful. Obviously with our public pensions, many of whom have been successful, but also our large institutional asset managers. I take Goldman Sachs asset management and merchant banking as a fine example of a very successful investor. With a large pool of AUM. But I mean, you could cut across any number of our large investment managers across the United States. I mean, that we've got some of the largest in the world, and they've been fantastically successful.
Okay. Another interesting question, may or may not be up your alley. Space tech is growing fast. What are your views on space tech, and is it real? Do you see any opportunities for Goldman there?
That is a damn good question. I'm sure there are people at Goldman Sachs who have a view on it, who focus on it. I haven't. Okay. That is, and again, I grew up in financial services. I serve Goldman Sachs now. But I'm sure we have people in different parts of our investment bank and asset management area who are super knowledgeable and smart on it, but I'm definitely not one of them.
Okay. Can you talk about your emerging market strategies in places like Asia, for example?
Did you say energy market strategy?
Emerging. Let's take
Oh.
the Asian markets. So APAC, Asia, however you define it, Russ. So what do you think about your strategies there?
Look, I think it's phenomenal. You know, we are very focused across Asia. You know, we've made some progress lately in China. You know, we've got a joint venture that we just announced recently. You know, we're going through a licensing process there now as well. So I think we're still in the early innings. But I'd say, you know, we're making real progress in terms of establishing the foundation to actually build a real business there, you know, on our own, outside of kind of joint ventures and partnerships. And I'd say it cuts across Asia, and you know, as many of you know, you know, we've certainly had recent setbacks in Asia, you know, that have impacted us from a number of different perspectives, but we're quickly moving beyond that. And I'd say, you know, I look at China, I look at Australia, New Zealand, where we're doing amazingly well across a number of our businesses. You know, but I also look at Singapore, Hong Kong, and Tokyo, in Japan, where we're just incredibly strong. So I continue to see it as a real growth opportunity for us.
Mm-hmm. Question about the pandemic, and you had mentioned Goldman has come back in person. The question is, how is the pandemic going to affect Goldman's work? Sort of going forward, how will you adapt as people move farther from in-person relationships? Or in your view, is Goldman back to being in person and things are back to the way they used to be?
I don't think there's any going backwards. I think it's all about moving forward. And you know, the pandemic showed us that we could be efficient a number of different ways from a distance. And coming out of the pandemic, I think we're all getting more comfortable with being in person. And I think we're getting to the point where, with the right precautions in place, you know, we feel comfortable and safe, you know, interacting in person and going to see clients in person and traveling. And so I don't think it's about going backwards. I think it's about going forwards and just understanding that our toolkit has expanded. You know, we have a lot more optionality in terms of, you know, how we go about solving problems. You know, I'd give, for example, the IPO process, where, you know, back in the days when I used to do it, we'd get a big old corporate jet, and we take our CEO and CFO, and, you know, we do 1 or 2 cities per day, meeting with investors, doing a big lunch, you know, meeting with more investors, maybe doing a dinner. And we do that for 10 or 14 days straight. And at the end of it, they'd be exhausted and tired. I think that's over. I think a lot of the marketing process around transactions like that will, quite frankly, be done via Zoom like this. Now, that being said, I'm sure there'll be investors, there'll be opportunities, there'll be transactions where it makes sense to meet in person. And I think that tool is still in the kit. But I think we have this additional tool now that I think we're going to make a lot more use of. And I think that cuts across everything. That cuts across how we do M&A. It cuts across how we raise debt. It cuts across how we meet with our colleagues, quite frankly. We've got more tools now. We've got in-person meetings. You know, we've got teleconference and we've got video conference. And we're going to use all those tools.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of personal questions that sort of came in. More thinking about, let me see here, let me go here. First, let me start with, what was the most challenging aspect of becoming Chief Strategy Officer after having been in investment banking? Sort of what did you find sort of the hardest to adapt to in your new role?
I thought, as an investment banker who spent 20 years covering financial institutions, that I understood how this whole bank thing works. I thought if anyone understood Goldman Sachs, it's me. And I had no idea. And so, you know, I would say the first several months, and even to this day, to some extent, I felt like I was drinking from a fire hose, learning all the different parts of Goldman Sachs, learning what different parts of our businesses did. One of the things that really impressed me was what a massive engineering organization we have. It wouldn't have been clear to me sitting in my little box in investment banking, but seeing the firm now up close and just spending all my time now thinking Goldman Sachs, I have been incredibly impressed by the depth and the strength and the complexity of what we have to do on the engineering side. It's amazing, and we have a huge team, and they're phenomenal. We have some of the best engineers across the country who are solving problems for us every single day, and it's spectacular. And I'd say that was a challenge understanding all that, but it's also been it's actually been an incredibly gratifying part of the job.
So we have a couple of questions just about, do you have, if you look at your career path, do you have any regrets? Do you have any advice for others who might want a career path like yours? Sort of what would you have what would you have preferred? You had different attributes, or, just looking back on your life, what do you think, how do you think about it? Do you have regrets? What advice would you give to others?
I definitely don't have any regrets. I'd say the advice I'd get is the same advice I've gotten, which is really learn to listen and ask questions and try and just understand more than anything else. Number two is get to know the people you're working with. And that extends to Booth, right? Get to know your classmates, get to know, the people in the class ahead of you, get to know the people in the class behind you. There's just such an incredibly rich pool of talent there, and just a lot of really fantastic people. And you never know. A bunch of these people, I guarantee it, are going to be important to you 2 or 3 decades from now, either as personal friends or as colleagues, or as clients, or as mentors or as mentees. I guarantee it, a bunch of these people are going to be super important to you, but you don't know who. So try and get to know as many people as you can. And those relationships are important. They matter. They certainly mattered to me a lot more than I thought they would.
So we have another question. I think you're honestly too young to answer this, which is sort of, what will your legacy be? Or what would you like your legacy to be?
I think you're right. I hope I'm too young for that.
Question, what direct involvement or involvement do you have with diversity, equity, and inclusion at Goldman? It's
a good question. And I'll tell you, one of the things that's been most satisfying about my career has been just that. I'd say, I guess it was about 10-ish years ago, I started working with then our head of our investment banking division, David Solomon, on our Black professional network within investment banking. And I'd say it's been one of the most rewarding experiences in my career. One of the first things I did when I decided to work on it was I just got to know, I basically went and got to know all the Black professionals in our investment bank. I spent time with everyone, analysts, associates, VPs, managing directors. One of the things I did was I hosted a series of dinners actually at David's apartment, where we bring all the managing directors and VPs together. And back then we could do that and we could all fit around his dining room table. I am thankful to say that no longer works. We can no longer fit around a single dining room table. And we ultimately did have to bring it to Goldman Sachs and do it in one of our big dining facilities. But I'd say it was an amazing opportunity. And a lot of those people that I worked with back then, a lot of them are close friends now. A lot of them, our families are close, our kids are close. It's been incredibly rewarding to kind of build that sense of community, and also just to mentor people and to just understand the different challenges that different people face. I'd say certainly early in my career, I benefited from being mentored by a lot of very senior female bankers who took me under their wing. And I'm incredibly grateful for them. I would not be where I am. I wouldn't have had the career that I've had so far without their help along the way. But I think just kind of sitting in my seat and kind of where I am from, I think I do have a natural appreciation for kind of people who are coming at this from outside of, outside of the majority.
We have a question going back to the energy issue now. Could you talk about sort of Goldman and its view on renewables, and sort of how is Goldman thinking about climate change more broadly?
Yeah, look, that's a fantastic question. Yeah, it's something we spent a lot of time thinking about. We actually tasked a team within our executive office that focuses on that area specifically. And we did it within our executive office because it's something, quite frankly, that permeates across all of our businesses. And so, within our asset management business, we have a huge focus on developing ESG product for our investing clients, both institutions as well as individuals. Within our global markets business, we have a huge focus on the trading side for all of the trading opportunities that arise around it. Whether it's trading credits or whether it's intraday trading of renewables. My group actually worked with our global markets division to announce a strategic investment in a company in Denmark over the course of the summer, and we entered into a commercial arrangement, and it's all geared around basically approaching the trading of renewables on an intraday basis. And across, of course, our investment banking division, where just a number of our clients are focused on this. They're being graded on it. They're being assessed by investors, by customers, by employees. And so it's just incredibly important to focus on it from all aspects of our business. So we staffed our team in our executive office, but then we've got leaders across each of our business units focused on just understanding how ESG impacts their business and where there are opportunities for us, quite frankly, to be on our front foot and actually be a contributor to help solve problems.
Question, not sure how much in detail you want to go on, but maybe broadly, what were the best investments that you made on behalf of Goldman, and what did you learn from them?
Good question. Well, I've been in my job now for 10 months, 9.5 months. Yeah, I guess 9.5 months. So I guess we'll see. Ask me that again in 3 years.
All right. Okay. So question says, how have business and company relationships changed as the US moves towards a more impermanent job role rather than the traditional one job for life structure? So as people are sort of moving in and out of roles, does that change the way you at Goldman think about talent, for example, or the relationships that you have with others?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think in terms of just thinking about Goldman Sachs selfishly, there are a number of folks like me running around who have been here for a while. There are people who've been here a lot longer, and I think we go into every relationship, every hire, hoping that people want to come here and make a career and stay for a long time. But we've learned to accept that it's not for everyone, and people will come, they'll try it out, and they may stay for a couple years, they may stay for a decade. But we understand that that's kind of the reality, and it's been a reality to some extent for a long time. But we've learned to accept it, and I think we do a great job of helping people develop their career here, helping people find other jobs within our institution. So really leveraging talent across different business areas, across different divisions. So where people want to try something different, do something new, they have the opportunity to do that within Goldman. But then we're also helpful, and we try to maintain long relationships with people, even if they leave the shop, because, quite frankly, when I look across our clients, it's amazing. It's amazing how many of them are Goldman Sachs alumni. And it's also fun just kind of looking at what people I started at Goldman Sachs, what they end up doing 10, 15 years down the road, and people are doing a lot of cool, interesting, exciting things. I think that only accrues to the benefit of the institution. So look, I think we've learned to accept it. We hope everyone stays a long time, but to the extent people don't, we try to maintain the relationship and learn from it.
So we have a follow-on question from something you mentioned, Russ, about the fact that there are so many technologists at Goldman and engineers. And the question was sort of what are some of the roles that these engineers are doing at Goldman?
Yeah, there are a lot of different roles, and it's not unlike what you'd see at an Amazon or a Microsoft or elsewhere. We've got hardcore engineers, expert coders, people who are focused on things like machine learning, distributed ledger technology, Really trying to solve advanced engineering problems on the one hand. Given our history and who we are, we've got strats, people who are analyzing data and looking for patterns and designing algorithms around the markets. We've also got project managers and product managers and people who kind of sit on that edge between engineering and commerce, who are looking to commercialize technology. So we've got a wide range of roles across our organization. We've got engineering people who sit in each of our divisions and so are very much front facing in terms of working with our divisions to face clients and pursue opportunities. We've got people who sit in core engineering, which is like our central engineering hub, and they're much more focused on the foundation of our technology platform. So I'd say we have a broad range of engineering roles here.
Going back to something sort of personal, can you talk a little bit about philanthropy and sort of why is that important to you, and how do you stay involved?
Yeah, so my wife and I we're heavily involved in, I would say, 4 institutions that are really important to us. My wife graduated from a program called Prep for Prep. Works in New York. It basically takes kids out of disadvantaged communities, usually around grade 5 or 6, preps them, and then works with them to get admitted to private schools throughout the city, and then continues to work with them through private school and ultimately into college to make sure they're successful. My wife grew up in East New York. She went through this program, eventually she went to Chapin, a very nice private school on the Upper East Side, and then off to, dare I say, Wharton for her undergraduate business degree. And I mean, it was tremendously beneficial to her. A lot of her closest friends came out of the same program. And I'm proud to say she was the first alumni trustee on their board of directors, and we're both very solid supporters of the organization. We also support our kids' school, Chapin, which has been really helpful in terms of my wife's life. And then I've become quite the art collector over the course of the last few years, and have developed quite a passion, in particular for art by Black and African American artists. And so I've joined the board of the Studio Museum in Harlem. And I think that's a passion project for me. I'm also on the board of HSS, which has been just phenomenal. It's just a fantastic opportunity. I think if you cut across all of these, and especially HSS, but it's a fantastic opportunity to get into another organization and understand how they solve problems. Excuse me, how they solve problems, how they think about the world. And for me, it's particularly valuable because I'm getting out of financial services and I'm getting out of the for-profit world. And so the North Star is just different. The problems are different. And so I find it super energizing and super stimulating. And it's also obviously a fantastic opportunity to contribute to things I really care about.
I know we're a bit out of time, Russ. Maybe I'll take a couple more questions if that's okay with you. And
yeah, sure.
You started a bit late. So question, what are your views on the banking opportunity in Africa? Are you planning to do more in terms of your presence, maybe, and possibly establish offices outside South Africa?
It's a great question. I've got to say, I'm not completely up to speed on everything we're doing in Africa. I know we've got a pretty significant presence in Johannesburg. We've dipped in and out of Kenya as well. And we've got a number of people in London and in Dubai as well who spend time in the region. But I'm not completely up to speed on everything we're doing there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a couple of personal questions. So one is more advice. What are the top 3 personal qualities you look for in hiring somebody?
I want to see people who are super hardworking. So I love to see people give me examples of situations and circumstances where they just had to work really hard and be super efficient, and that show that they persevered through something. that just required a lot of sweat to get through. I'd say that's important to me. Number two, I want to see people who keep positive attitude, a growth mindset. And so, even when things are tough, even when you're grinding through something, can you show me that you found the things about it that you really loved, that were valuable to you, and did you stay positive? Are you gonna be a fun person for me to work with even when things are kind of rocky? That's a big deal for me as well.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you this last question, which came from the audience. You're an impressive and accomplished individual. Would you ever consider running for public office? Our nation needs leaders like you.
That is incredibly flattering. That's awesome. I haven't thought about it. It's not really in my personality. That being said, becoming a public bureaucrat has piqued my interest from time to time, but I've got no current intention to do that.
Okay. Well, your organization certainly has sent many people to Washington over the years, I would say.
That is a fair point.
Russ, I just thank you for staying on a few extra minutes. I just want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today and for being so open and candid in answering questions from all over the place, from personal to strategic to finance, and your time at Booth. We're obviously incredibly proud at Booth to have you as an alum, and thrilled by all that you've achieved. So congratulations, and thanks again for being with us today.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.